I remember the first time I noticed it wasn't about the rules. At least, not only about the rules. It was a Tuesday morning, quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you finally chose the right place to live. I was standing at the kitchen sink, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the street through the window. Same houses, same lawns, same rhythm I'd grown used to. Nothing looked wrong. Then I saw the envelope. White, official, tucked halfway into the mailbox like it had been waiting for me. Not urgent looking, not threatening, just there. That's how it always started. Inside was a notice about my lawn. Grass height, 1 inch over the limit, according to the HOA. I read it twice. Then I went outside and looked. My lawn looked like everyone else's, maybe better. I'd always taken pride in it. I measured it myself. It was close, sure, but not different. I shrugged it off, trimmed it that afternoon. Didn't think much more about it. That was my mistake. The next notice came 3 days later. This one about my trash bin. Apparently, it had been visible from the street too long after pickup. The letter was polite, firm. It reminded me of community standards. I walked down the block that evening. Trash bins were still out, some tipped over, some right up against the curb. None of those houses had notices taped to their doors. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone complained. Maybe I'd been unlucky. Maybe they were just starting to enforce things more strictly. That's what people say when they want to believe the system is neutral. The fine started small, $25, then $50. Each notice came with a deadline and language that sounded calm but carried weight. Failure to comply. Further action. Administrative review. I called the HOA office to ask a simple question. Why me? The woman on the phone was polite in the way people are when they want to end a conversation quickly. She told me the rules applied to everyone. She told me enforcement was consistent. She told me if I had concerns, I could submit them in writing. I did exactly that. While I waited for a response, the fines kept coming. One was for my porch light. Apparently it was too bright. Another for a plant near my front steps that wasn't on the approved list. I checked the list. It was vague, broad, full of room for interpretation. I started documenting everything, photos, dates, times. I created a folder on my laptop and another in a drawer. I told myself this was temporary, that someone would look at the record and see the pattern and stop it. That belief didn't last long. The first time I attended a board meeting, I dressed carefully. Nothing flashy, nothing casual. I sat straight and spoke calmly. I explained that I'd fixed every issue as soon as I'd been notified. I asked why the fines continued even after compliance. No one answered that question. They thanked me for my time. They moved on to the next item. I left feeling small, not angry, just unsettled. After that, things changed in ways that were harder to document. Emails got shorter, responses took longer. When I called, I was told to email. When I emailed, I was told to wait. Deadlines passed while I waited. One afternoon, I noticed 2 men walking the street with clipboards. They stopped in front of my house, took photos, wrote things down. They didn't stop at every house, just a few, mine included. I asked what they were documenting. One of them said, general compliance. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the house like I wasn't part of the equation. That night, I couldn't sleep, not because anything dramatic had happened, but because something felt off, like I'd been placed under a microscope without being told why. I started noticing the way neighbors interacted with me. How conversations ended quicker, how smiles didn't last as long. No one was rude, no one said anything outright. They didn't have to. The fines continued to grow, not just from new notices, but from fees added onto fees, processing, late charges, interest, small amounts that stacked quietly. I paid what I could when I could, Each payment felt like bailing water from a boat that was still taking on more. I asked about a payment plan. The response came weeks later. Denied. No explanation. I asked for a hearing. They said the window had passed. I asked when the window was. They sent me a highlighted section of the bylaws. The deadline had been during the same week I was waiting for a response to my written concerns. Technically, they were right. That word, technically, started showing up everywhere. Technically compliant, technically late, technically allowed. Nothing about it felt right, but everything about it was clean on paper. Around that time, I put a small sign in my window. Nothing loud, nothing confrontational. Just 2 words that meant something to me. Life matters. No symbols, no slogans. Just that. It was there for less than a day. The next notice cited unauthorized signage. Immediate removal required. I took it down that morning. I didn't argue. I didn't post anything else. The fines didn't stop. After that, the tone shifted again. Letters started referencing further remedies, collection actions, language that didn't explain itself but didn't need to. I asked a neighbor if they'd ever been fined. They laughed, said the board was pretty relaxed, said they usually worked with people. I asked what happened if someone missed a deadline. They give you time, he said, as long as you communicate. I'd been communicating for months. At some point, I realized no one had ever said what this was really about. No one mentioned race. No one mentioned anything personal. They didn't need to. The pattern spoke for them. Rules applied differently when applied to me. That understanding didn't bring relief. It brought fear. Because if this wasn't about something I could fix, grass, lights, bins, then there was nothing left to correct. No final adjustment, no box to check, just a process that had started moving. I sat at my kitchen table one evening, the same place I'd read every notice and tried to map it out. Where this could end, how far it could go. That's when it hit me. They never said it was about race. They didn't have to. Everything they needed was already written down. The fear didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly through routines that used to feel safe. I started waking up earlier than I needed to, not because I had somewhere to be, but because sleep stopped feeling like rest. My mind would replay conversations with the HOA, emails I'd sent, notices I hadn't fully understood until days later. Every morning began with a scan of the front window, then the door, then the mailbox. The mailbox became the center of everything. Some days there was nothing inside, and those were the worst. Silence meant something was moving without me. Other days there was another envelope, thicker than the last, folded with an authority that felt heavier than paper should. I opened each one carefully, like I might break something if I rushed. The language was never aggressive. That was part of the problem. It was calm, procedural. Words like reminder and follow-up wrapped around phrases that carried consequences I couldn't fully see yet. One letter explained that my account was now considered delinquent. That word sat in my chest like a weight. Delinquent sounded criminal, even though nothing I'd done was illegal. It changed how I saw myself, how I imagined they saw me. I called again. This time, I asked to speak to someone specific, a board member, anyone. The person on the phone told me all communication had to be in writing. When I said I'd already sent emails, she told me they were under review. When I asked how long review took, she said it depended. On what? I didn't know. At the next board meeting, I wasn't invited to speak at all. My name wasn't on the agenda. When I raised my hand, the chair glanced at me and said they were short on time. They discussed landscaping budgets, holiday decorations, a community barbecue. I sat there listening, wondering how my life could be unraveling while the meeting carried on like nothing was wrong. Afterward, One of the board members approached me in the parking lot. He didn't say my name. He said, "You need to understand, this is how things work." I asked him what he meant. He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Everyone's expected to meet the same standards. I wanted to ask why those standards seemed to follow me more closely than anyone else. I wanted to ask why I was the only one drowning in fines, but I didn't. Fear does that. It convinces you silence might still protect you. The next notice introduced a new element: attorney's fees, not mine. The HOA's fees I was now responsible for because my account required legal review. I hadn't seen a lawyer. I hadn't been to court, but lawyers were already involved in my life, quietly adding zeros to a balance I couldn't catch. I asked if I could make a partial payment to reduce the amount. The response was immediate this time. Partial payments not accepted at this stage. That sentence marked a shift. Before, I'd believed there was still a way to climb out, that if I paid something, anything, it would show good faith. Now good faith didn't matter.
Only stages. Once you entered one stage, the previous options disappeared. I started cutting expenses everywhere else. No eating out, no subscriptions. I delayed medical appointments. I told myself it was temporary, that once this was resolved, I'd catch up. But the balance kept growing faster than I could adjust. Each notice included a breakdown, small numbers stacked into something enormous: administrative costs, processing fees, interest, charges I didn't recognize but didn't know how to challenge. I asked for a detailed explanation. They sent me the same breakdown again. Nothing new, nothing clarified. Neighbors began avoiding me, not openly, just subtly. Conversations ended when I approached. Invitations stopped coming. When I walked my dog, people waved from farther away. I couldn't tell if they'd been told something or if fear was contagious. One afternoon, I overheard two women talking near their driveways as I passed. One of them lowered her voice when she saw me. The other said, "I heard the HOA's involved." That was it. No details, no context, just enough to change how people looked at me. I stopped going outside unless I had to. The first time the word lien appeared, I didn't understand what it meant. I had to look it up. The definition made my stomach drop. A claim against my home, not a threat, not a possibility, a step. I called the number on the notice and asked what this meant for me. The man who answered spoke slowly, like he was explaining something simple. "It's just part of the process," he said. Process, again. I asked what came next. "That depends," he said, "on whether the account is resolved." Resolved how? I didn't know. They'd already refused partial payment. The total amount was more than I could produce at once. I asked if there was any appeal. He paused, then said, "You've already used your appeal window." I asked when that was. He referred me to the bylaws. Everything led back to the bylaws. I read them late at night, eyes burning, mind foggy. Page after page of authority granted, discretion allowed, remedies outlined. There were sections about compliance and penalties, but very little about protecting homeowners when things spiraled. It felt one-sided, like the rules were written to move forward, not to stop. The lien was recorded a week later. I didn't hear about it from the HOA. I found out when a friend searched my address online and called me confused. "Is everything okay?" she asked. I told her yes, out of habit, out of shame. After that, I stopped telling people anything. Fear changed my sense of time. Days moved quickly, but the future felt compressed, like it was rushing toward me, whether I was ready or not. I started imagining worst-case scenarios: losing the house, packing my things, explaining to my family how this happened without sounding irresponsible. I kept asking myself the same question: what did I miss? Every step had been documented, every notice delivered, every deadline technically fair. That was the problem. Nothing about this required anyone to say the quiet part out loud. No slurs, no raised voices, no explicit threats. Just enforcement. Consistent on paper, isolated in practice. They never said it was about race. But I couldn't ignore who was standing alone in this process. And the deeper it went, the clearer it became. Once the system decided to move, there was no room left for explanation, only outcomes. By the time the notice of intent arrived, I understood something I hadn't before. Fear wasn't a reaction anymore, it was the design. The notice of intent didn't look any different from the others. That was the first thing I noticed. Same font, same paper, same calm, professional tone. If you didn't know what it meant, you might think it was just another reminder, another step in a process that could still be corrected. But this one changed everything. It stated in plain language that the association was now authorized to move forward. No emotion, no urgency markers, just a timeline and a reference number. I read it 3 times before the words settled. This wasn't pressure anymore. This was momentum. I called the number at the bottom of the page, even though I already knew what they would say. The woman who answered sounded practiced, not unkind, just finished with this conversation before it started. I asked if there was anything I could still do. She said the account was now in enforcement. I asked what that meant. She said future communication would be handled by their legal department. I asked if I could speak to someone there.
She told me they would contact me if necessary. Necessary for whom, I wondered. From that point on, the HOA stopped speaking to me directly. Everything came through letters from attorneys I had never met. Names that meant nothing to me but carried weight because they were attached to firms and letterheads. Each letter added costs. Every response I sent added more. I finally hired a lawyer of my own. I brought him everything, the folder, the emails, the photos, the timeline. He listened quietly, took notes, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and sighed. He said the words I'd been dreading. Nothing here is illegal. He explained that HOAs in this state had broad authority. That non-judicial foreclosure was allowed under certain conditions. That once a lien was in place and deadlines passed, the process moved forward unless stopped early. Early. That word haunted me. I asked about discrimination. I asked about selective enforcement. I asked if the pattern mattered. He nodded, said it mattered morally, said it mattered socially, but proving intent was difficult when everything followed procedure. They don't have to explain themselves, he said. They just have to document. I left his office feeling smaller than when I walked in. The house started feeling different after that, like it no longer belonged to me in the way it once had. I stopped making plans around it, stopped imagining holidays there, stopped fixing things that didn't need fixing. I was afraid of investing in something that might already be gone. The day the foreclosure date was set, I didn't receive a dramatic notice. It was buried in a packet of documents that looked almost identical to the ones before it. Same tone, same structure, just one line that changed everything. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the wall for a long time. No one came to the door. No one made a scene. The neighborhood looked exactly the same. That's what scared me most. The process didn't require disruption. It didn't need conflict. It worked quietly behind the scenes while life appeared normal on the outside. Friends asked how I was doing. I told them I was tired. Family asked if things had improved. I said they were in progress. I didn't know how to explain that progress was the problem. In the weeks leading up to the sale, I tried one last time to negotiate. I offered everything I had saved. I asked if the remaining balance could be waived or deferred. The response was short. The account could only be resolved in full. I understood then that this wasn't about compliance anymore. It wasn't about correction. It was about completion. The foreclosure sale itself took minutes. No courtroom, no testimony, no opportunity to speak, just numbers exchanged and papers signed. My house was sold for less than it was worth, enough to cover the HOA's fees, enough to cover their attorney's fees, enough to close the file. Nothing left for me. Legally, the matter was resolved. Emotionally, it wasn't. I packed my things slowly, not because I wanted to, but because rushing made it feel too real. I wrapped dishes I used for years. I boxed up photos I hadn't looked at in a long time. No one from the HOA contacted me after the sale. No explanation, no acknowledgement. The process had finished its job. I drove past the house a few weeks later. New locks, same lawn, same street. If you didn't know what had happened, you'd never guess. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. They imagine shouting, protests, some dramatic moment where someone steps in and stops it. That didn't happen. Nothing stopped it because nothing broke the rules. And that's when it finally became clear to me. They never had to say it was about race. They didn't have to say anything at all. The system already knew who it could move against quietly. Who would struggle to fight back? Who would be isolated enough for the process to run without resistance? No one wrote it down. No one said it out loud. But the outcome spoke for itself. I live somewhere else now. I keep my head down. I read everything twice. I don't assume fairness where power is involved. People ask if I do anything differently. I don't know how to answer that because I followed the rules as they were written. What I didn't understand was how differently those rules could be used. Fear didn't come from losing my home. Fear came from realizing how easily it happened and how quietly it could happen again.